For 300 years, scientists had a mystery they couldn't solve. The samurai. Japan's most iconic warriors didn't quite add up. Their armor, their horses, their military tactics, their genetic code. None of it pointed only to Japan. Ancient DNA pulled from burial mounds across Japan has now cracked open a mystery that rewrites everything you think you know about the world's most legendary warrior class. The samurai were not born from one ancient people. They were the result of a biological hack, a hidden wave of migrants, horses, and warrior genes that crossed the sea and connected the islands to one of the most dangerous warrior cultures in human history. Picture the Japanese archipelago around 900 CE. The imperial court in Kyoto still exists. Silk robes, poetry competitions, elaborate rituals. But outside those palace walls, the real Japan is run by armed clans. Powerful families who control land, command loyalty, and settle disputes the only way that matters out on the frontier, with violence. These fighters, provincial warriors bound by loyalty and trained in mounted combat, are the backbone of what will become the samurai. But here is the question that has haunted historians for centuries. Where did they actually come from? Because when you look at the earliest samurai clans, the Taira, the Minamoto, their military culture doesn't look like it emerged naturally from Japanese history. It looks imported. The style of their weapons, the way they rode, the structure of their warrior clans. All of it carries fingerprints, cultural and now genetic, that connect Japan's warrior elite to something much older and much more dangerous than a set of islands in the Pacific. Long before the samurai, there were the Jomon, hunter-gatherers who arrived in the Japanese archipelago more than 10,000 years ago. They fished the coasts, hunted in dense mountain forests, and created some of the world's oldest known pottery. Genetically, the Jomon were deeply distinct from mainland Asian populations. Separated by ocean for thousands of years, they developed their own biological signature still detectable in modern Japanese DNA today. Then, around 2,300 years ago, the first wave hit. These were the Yayoi, migrants arriving through the Korean peninsula, bringing rice farming, metal tools, and a new form of social hierarchy. Their DNA was closer to populations from Korea and eastern China. The transformation was slow. Decades of coexistence, intermarriage, and gradual displacement as farming communities outgrew hunter-gatherer bands. Villages became settlements. Settlements became political territories. Power began to concentrate. Power began. Modern Japanese people still carry both Jomon and Yayoi ancestry, layered in different proportions. That was the established story. 2 waves, 2 ancestries, a blended population. Then came the discovery that changed everything. When genetic scientists began extracting ancient DNA from Japan's Kofun period burial mounds, those massive keyhole-shaped tombs built between the 3rd and 6th centuries CE, they expected to find what they already knew. That is not what they found. Researchers now call it Kofun Ancestry, the 3rd wave. And it didn't arrive gradually, it arrived suddenly concentrated in the graves of the elite. The most powerful individuals buried in the most elaborate tombs, surrounded by weapons, armor, horse gear, and bronze mirrors. This wasn't just cultural influence drifting across the water. This was people, families, lineages. Elites crossing the sea and embedding themselves directly into positions of power in early Japan. Their genetic signal traces back to mainland East Asia, specifically populations connected to Korea and northern China. But these migrants didn't just bring new genes. They brought something that would physically transform how war was fought in Japan. They brought horses. Before the Kofun period, horses were almost non-existent as military animals in Japan. After the 3rd wave arrived, mounted warfare began to transform the archipelago. Armor styles changed, weapons evolved. Military tactics shifted from infantry skirmishing to the clan-based, horse-mounted combat that would define the samurai for the next 1,000 years. The warriors who would carry the title of samurai were riding horses that arrived with migrant elites, fighting in a style that arrived with migrant elites. carrying genetic ancestry that arrived with migrant elites. But the trail doesn't stop at Korea and northern China, because mounted warrior culture didn't begin there either. It came from the steppe, the vast belt of grassland stretching from Eastern Europe across Central Asia into Mongolia. The same territory that gave rise to the Scythians, the Huns, and centuries later, the Mongols. The genetic and cultural signals embedded in early Japanese warrior elites connect them indirectly but unmistakably to this wider Eurasian pattern of horse-based warrior societies. The horses, the tactics, the clan-based military hierarchy, the mounted archery. These were not Japanese inventions. They were technologies and traditions that spread across Asia for thousands of years. This does not mean samurai were Huns or Mongols. What it means is this: the technologies, the animals, and the warrior traditions that transformed Japan were connected to a current of movement that ran all the way across the ancient world. The samurai were the eastern edge of a continent-wide revolution in how human beings fought, and the DNA proves it. The Kofun period burial mounds of Japan's warrior elite contained a distinctive style of grave goods weapons, horse gear, and bronze mirrors pointing to strong continental connections. But one specific item found in these tombs was almost identical to artifacts found thousands of miles away on the Eurasian steppe. What was it? A. A type of curved sword design. B. A distinctive style of iron stirrup. C. Bronze cauldrons used in ritual feasting. A specific pattern of lacquered armor. The answer is in the video description. Go check it. Drop your guess in the comments below. By the late 700s CE, Japan's imperial court still held symbolic authority. But symbolic authority doesn't protect your farmland from a rival clan. Out in the provinces, the only authority that mattered was the one holding the sword. Armed clans had been building power for generations, bound not by imperial decree but by something older and more durable. Loyalty, bloodline, obligation. Over generations, these provincial warriors became a hereditary class. Status passed through bloodlines. Genealogies were guarded like military intelligence. Clans claimed descent from noble houses and imperial bloodlines, building elaborate origin stories to justify their grip on power. But biology tells a more complicated story than any family legend. By the time the Kamakura shogunate rose in the 12th century, the first military government in Japanese history, the samurai were no longer just fighters. They were a civilization within a civilization, with their own art, their own poetry, their own philosophy. Bushido, the warrior's code, was developing. Loyalty unto death, mastery of the blade, acceptance of mortality. A code that is completely without question Japanese. But the biological foundation on which it was built begins thousands of miles away, on the wind-scoured grasslands of the Eurasian steppe. By the time of the Tokugawa shogunate in the 1600s, samurai were the untouchable apex of Japanese society. Swords at their sides, top knots marking their status, standing above all others in a rigid hierarchy that defined Japan for 250 years. They were seen as the purest expression of Japanese identity, and in a profound cultural sense they were. But in their genes was a different story. Japan was built in layers. The Jomon, 10,000 years of isolation, forging a genetically distinct island people. The Yayoi, a wave of farmers bringing agriculture and new hierarchy. The Kofun third wave, migrant elites bringing horses, warrior tactics, and DNA that wired a new ruling class into the islands. Each wave didn't replace what came before. It blended with it. The samurai are proof that civilizations are not forged from purity. They are forged from mixture. Their armor was lacquered in Japanese style. Their swords were folded in Japanese fire. Their code of honor was written in Japanese blood. But the ancestry in their veins connected them to hunter-gatherers on ancient Japanese coasts, to rice farmers from Korea and China, and to a continent-wide warrior tradition that stretched all the way to the grasslands of Central Asia. The legend of the samurai doesn't become smaller when we learn this. It becomes bigger. Because now, instead of a closed story of one island people, we see an epic. A story of migration, adaptation, and transformation. Of people crossing seas with horses and new genes and producing, across centuries of blending, one of the most extraordinary warrior cultures in all of human history. That secret was written into their DNA 1,500 years ago, and science has only just learned to read it. The samurai hid their true origins in genealogy scrolls and family legends. But they weren't the first people in history to hide something extraordinary inside a story everyone thought they already understood. 12,000 years before the first civilizations were even a dream, our planet was undergoing a transformation so violent, it almost ended the human story. If you haven't seen that breakdown of how the world changed, it's already waiting for you. See you there.